Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, Ad Nauseam listeners, to episode 150, the sesquicentennial episode. How did we get here?
I have no idea. It seems like yesterday we were, down in three previous bunkers again.
Yes, well, actually, we were
let's not talk about it.
Huddled beneath a blanket in my living room, trying to provide some acoustic baffling.
Oh, man.
It was baffling, that's for sure.
We have come a long way.
We have.
Yeah.
Episode 150. My name is Dr. David C. Noe. The C stands for crotchety. Down here in the basement, Vomitorium South, the bunker, RHB bookstore and warehouse, generously loaned to us with my good friend and fabulous co-host, Dr. Jeffrey T. Winkle. What's the T stand for?
Thomas.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I thought it was going to be something else.
Oh, I said, no, I just told the truth.
Troubling?
I didn't, yeah, maybe
You're not supposed to tell the truth on this podcast. Right. How are you today, Jeff?
I'm feeling good. I like that the summer weather is here. And I'm out of kind of my regular semester routine, so it's kind of a time to relax. And so let me just kind of share a little bit about
let me hear that.
What I've been doing. So I'm not a big drinker, but every once in a while I like to have a beer and watch the game.
Okay, yeah.
And there's a place I like to go to.
Right.
So I was cruising to the bar on the shore. It's kind of a dive. There's a picture greased its grime on the door, and I was in there. And it was, have a drink, watching the baseball game. This guy walked in, and he looked so familiar, and I couldn't place it. It wasn't somebody I knew, but it was somebody famous, and he really resembled. I realized some kind of. He looked like an actor from a '70s sitcom.
Okay.
And I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And he was there. He had his drink, and he left. And it came to me, and I said to the guy next to me, I said, "That dude looks like a Brady." Come on.
Yeah, I get it. I get it.
All right.
That's an Aerosmith song.
It
right?
is. Yes, it is. Exactly.
Mm.
Yes. Yeah. And how are you doing, Dave?
I'm recovering.
Okay.
I'm recovering from that long setup. How long is this going to go on?
I don't know until it kind of burns itself out.
And it hasn't already a couple episodes ago?
It's problematic because I think we're trying to, every week the gauntlet is thrown down.
It's thrown down further.
Yes, exactly.
Gauntleter.
Right.
I'm doing pretty well. I have to say I'm loving the advent of summer weather here in mid-May. We've got 70s and 80s. One can stroll around the neighborhood, perambulate without a care in the world.
It's wonderful.
It is really nice.
Yeah.
Really nice.
Yes.
So what are we talking about today, Jeff?
Well, we're taking a break from our series on the history of education in antiquity, and we're going to tackle some Lucian.
All right.
And I'm really excited about this.
Okay.
Because
you're an excitable fellow.
I am an excitable fellow, but I realized as I was getting into this, I did not know much about Lucian of Samosata. And as reading this bit of this work, his work called Alexander the False Prophet, I find this funny.
Okay.
Interesting, weird,
and
very different from a lot of the stuff that we've covered on the podcast.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm eager to get into it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's do that. I think you have. We have no shout out, do we?
We do not. No shout out.
But
today.
you have the opening quote, I believe.
Yes.
This one is from a Brocht Branham. Mm-hmm. That's not a made up name, is it?
It sounds a little made up.
Okay.
But I'll take him at his word that that's his name. And this comes from an article from Classical Antiquity back in 1984. Entitled The Comic as Critic, Revenging Epicurus, a study of Lucian's art of comic narrative. And he writes, the principal disagreement among modern readers of Lucian ultimately concerns the context in which he is to be read. Should he be seen primarily against the background of the ancient literary traditions he draws on, or as a fairly typical product of a highly rhetorical literary culture who offers variations on the old and familiar formulae of sophistic literature, or is he, on the contrary, essentially a topical satirist whose work can be properly understood only with reference to the 2nd century controversies and cultural trends that inspired it? While recognizing the fundamental importance of Lucian's vast and varied literary borrowings and the force of topicality in some of his works, I believe that both of these approaches reflect unnecessarily limited views of Lucian's artistic resources. Moreover, by emphasizing external references or compositional methods, they tend to neglect the fact that Lucian's texts were written with the immediate aim of entertaining an audience of second-century traditionalists. Thus, he must speak to contemporary concerns, to his audience's ideals and anxieties, and to their own specific sense of the congruous and incongruous, but he does so through deft manipulation of conventions and comic representation of traditional material. So have you read much Lucian?
I have not.
No.
I've read some adapted portions. They appear in Moss, actually.
Oh, do they really?
Yes, right near the end. There are several little dialogues there, spoofs on the gods and parodies adapted from Lucian. And I read the assigned portion in grad school.
Yeah.
The read this to make sure you're ready for the comprehensive exams.
Exactly.
But beyond that, no, I haven't dipped my toes in the Lucian opus.
Yeah, I did a little bit. He's more or less a direct contemporary of Apuleius, and a lot of the same questions. Listeners, Apuleius was the author that I did my dissertation work on.
The Metamorphosis, right, of the Golden Ass.
Yes, exactly. And like Lucian, they swim in the same pool,
right?
And lots of the same questions is, I would take this seriously. Is this comic?
Right. Lots
of parodies of Plato and other kind of works. He's doing what a lot of second century authors are doing at this time. And so I, by way of some comparison, I brought in some Lucian. And if our audience is familiar with Apuleius, they might know that there's a work called Lucius or the Ass, which is written by pseudo-Lucian. Scholars today don't think it's by Lucian, but it was something that survived under his name. Which was the kind of a short story version of what the Apuleius' Metamorphosis becomes a much more expanded form of. Right.
So I'm a little bit lost here with Professor Branham.
Yes.
Right. That's some pretty dense academic prose.
It is.
Can you kind of break it down for us and give us, what is he actually talking about? What is the question about Lucian and his work and purposes?
Right. And so, the second part of the paragraph, I chose this quote. I'm not all that interested in what Branham is trying to answer these questions. I'm much more interested in the questions themselves.
Right.
And so what I really wanted to kind of focus on here is this question that is in some ways kind of the unsolvable question about Lucian is, what is he up to?
Okay.
So, when he's doing a parody of Plato, of Homer, what's he trying to say?
Okay.
Is he trying to make a serious point in this? Is he just simply trying to make his audience, his circle of friends, laugh? Is this for a mass audience? What exactly do we make of this? And I ran into the same problem with Apuleius too, is that it's so difficult to read something in Latin or in Greek, translate it, and try to keep your own sense of humor and sarcasm out of it.
Okay.
But so much of Lucian to me reads like sarcasm, and so much of Apuleius reads like very sarcastic. But is he actually doing that, or am I bringing kind of my modern sensibilities of cynicisms to it?
Right.
So there's all of these layers that you have to try to cut through to try to figure out what Lucian is up to. And so I think that's Branham. He's another scholar who's trying to try to figure out what's he doing, who's he responding to, and is he trying to do something old school, or is he speaking to a contemporary audience?
Okay.
Yep.
Well, that's very helpful.
Yep.
But he also lays out two potential answers to that question.
Yes.
Right. One is that he's just a part of the general sophistic tradition of the time, 2nd century AD.
Yeah.
And the other answer is what? He's a topical satirist.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And I don't think it has to be an either or, right?
Okay.
Lucian can be all of these, can be both of those things and other things at the same time. So like I said, I'm not all that interested, for the sake of this episode, in Branham's conclusions about these things. But I think the questions that he raises are kind of the essential questions that have often and always been asked about Lucian.
Okay. So as we get into it a little bit, I think we have to provide the audience with some sense of who this man was.
Right.
Because he's fairly obscure. I mean, not actually, but he's not a big name.
No.
Cicero, Virgil, Homer, Plato, etc.
Right.
And so who was Lucian of Samosata?
Well, I mean, when I was doing my prep work for this, I had to look up where Samosata was.
Right.
I mean, I knew him as Lucian Samosata and had for years, but I couldn't have told you.
Right.
And so it's Samosata is a location that we would place in the southeastern part of the modern country of Turkey, and kind of in the northern part of what the Romans would have called Syria.
That's right.
And so he's kind of from the far corners of the Roman Empire.
Right.
And again, I don't want to hammer on Apuleius, but Apuleius too, he was a North African, and you grew up and lived and did most of his work outside of Carthage. And so one of the things you do find
modern day Tunisia.
Right. And so what you do find in the 2nd century is that there is a lot more literary work coming from what we might call the fringes of the Roman Empire and filtered through non-Italian and non-Greek, strictly speaking, cultures.
Right.
And Lucian is one of these.
Okay. So Samosata, as I look at the map, is in the region called the Levant, that area between Cyprus and the Turkish mainland, Asia Minor mainland.
Yeah.
Just north of the Orontes River, modern day Syria, like you say.
Yep.
So in Greek speaking, right? And all of Lucian's work is in Greek, is it not?
Yes, I believe that is true.
No Latin writings remain at all.
Right.
What are his approximate dates?
So most people date him born sometime around 125 and dies around 180.
Okay.
Which is almost exactly the dates that are given to Apuleius.
Again,
Apuleius, right?
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to sow the seeds that for one day we can do a multi-part episodes on the Metamorphoses.
Well, people have asked about that. Some of our listeners. Let's hear Jeff talk about Apuleius, because you know that I drone on about Cicero enough.
That'd be great. Well, yes. Sometime down the road we'll do that. Yeah.
All right.
So I was the one that suggested maybe doing an episode or two on Lucian.
Right.
And so I wasn't sure how this would go. Still don't know kind of how this will go.
I guess we'll see.
So the work that he's most famous for is this work called A True Story or A True History. But it's a novella and it's quite long. And so I didn't want to, chain ourselves to a multi-parter in case this didn't go well. So we're going to look at a shorter work of his, and this might expand it into a second episode as well, called Alexander the False Prophet.
Okay.
But this work, this true story, if a reader knows something about Lucian, they probably know something about that.
Right.
And it is a fascinating work. It is considered by some to be the first work of science fiction.
Oh.
And you have voyages to the moon, to Venus. You have interplanetary warfare. You have musings on artificial life. All of this hundreds, thousands of years before Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, which is where most people, at least in the Western tradition, place kind of the beginning of science fiction writing.
So
late
Jules
19th century.
Jules Verne, late 19th century.
Right.
Have you read any of those authors?
Yes, I've read. When I was a kid, I loved 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Yes. Yep.
H.G. Wells' Time Machine.
Journey to the Center of the Earth.
Yes.
It's a little bit dull at one point. But I read it and I enjoyed it.
Right, exactly. Well, like a lot of late 19th century writers, it's more is more.
Correct.
Right.
That's a good way to put it.
But you have this incredible, bizarre story 2,000 years before that that has a lot of those elements that we would say that's clearly science fiction.
So is that evidence of aliens, or that maybe H.G. Wells actually invented the time machine and went back and visited Lucian?
Oh, now you.
How come you're laughing? No, I can't be taken seriously. Apparently,
I'm laughing because I think that would be a great story in and of itself.
It's probably been done.
You think so?
Yeah.
Oh man, I don't know.
Don't you remember the early '80s television show, The Voyagers?
Oh, yes, and they go back in time.
They have this little elaborate watch thing, and they click it and they go back in time.
Yes. I do. I loved that show.
It was a good show. It didn't stay on the air very long.
No, maybe 2 seasons at most.
Yes.
Right. So, he, as an author, he's all over the place, and so he's often described as a satirist, and he's definitely he likes poking the thumb in the eye of lots of elements of the culture around him.
How would you define a satirist? It's just what you just said, poking one's thumb in the eye of the culture around.
Yes. Having fun with elements of the culture. I usually associate satire with, but also trying to make a serious point about something through the avenue of comedy or mockery.
Okay.
Right. How would you define satire?
Pretty much like that.
Okay.
I would probably add that it needs to be in verse, typically.
Oh, okay.
Historically, and Lucian is not in verse, right?
No, it's not.
It's a prose satire.
Yes.
The most famous prose satire of all time, Gulliver's Travels.
Right.
Jonathan Swift.
Yes, and I think that you can see a lot of Lucian
Absolutely.
in Gulliver's Travels, without a doubt. Right. So he is.
Tell us about the true story. Can you just give us? We're not dealing, if I may, we're not dealing with it today.
Yeah.
We're talking about Alexander the false prophet. That's the text. But could you give us a summary of a true story?
Well, I mean, it's a first-person narrative, so it's as if Lucian is telling you, this is what really happened. I mean, so even the title is satire, like this really happened, right. And he goes on these wild Gulliver-like adventures to all of these different lands, and along the way, he's doing parodies of Homer, he's doing parodies of Thucydides, of Plato, all along the way, and so there's all of these really interesting layers that make him very difficult to interpret.
Thucydides would not like that.
No, he would not like it, right?
Homer would go for it.
Yeah, I think Homer would be cool.
He'd love it. Plato would be okay with it. But
right.
Thucydides would be pretty irritated.
He would be very irritated. So it was probably good for Lucian that Thucydides was long dead.
That's true. 400 years, 500 years.
Right.
Because I think when Dr. Ken Bratt was here talking about Herodotus, I think that he called Thucydides pompous or arrogant.
He did.
Words to that effect.
Yes, exactly.
And I didn't disagree, but I was a little taken aback.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Thucydides would not have wanted to be parodied, I don't think.
No. So I thought that it'd be nice to set up this episode is to at least give the audience a bit of a taste of what the true history was like. And so I have this. You have it in front of you there?
Yes, I do.
So this is from chapter 12 of the true history. And so in this, Lucian, our first person narrator here, he visits the Isles of the Blessed and he meets up with Homer.
Talks with Homer.
And so would you read a bit of this translation?
Well, I was just going to ask because you got to read the opening quote.
Yes, no, this is all you here.
Who doesn't love the sound of their own voice? Well, I don't. So this is a translation by Alfred Church, but it's a reprint. Yeah, I think it's Alfred Church is a famous old classicist.
Okay.
So yes, if I can read this,
please.
Okay. After we had passed 2 or 3 days in the island very agreeably, I made a visit to the poet Homer, and it so chancing that both of us had leisure and could talk as much as we would, I asked many questions about himself and his poems. And first I inquired of him of what country he came, for about this, I said, the learned dispute violently up to this day. To this he answered, I know well what they say about me, how some will have it that I was born in the island of Chios, and others again that I was a man of the city of Smyrna, and a third party that I belong to Colophon. Now the real truth is that I come from none of these places, and indeed am no Greek at all, but was born in the city of Babylon, and among my own people had the name of Tigranes. As for this name of Homer, I got it because I was sent as a hostage to the land of Greece, where, as you know, Homer signifies hostage. Then I asked him, the wise men have noted many verses in your poems as ill-made, and not such as you would have written. Tell me if this be so. Not so indeed, he answered, for I wrote them all, and these men do not know the good from the bad. Next, I wished to know whether he wrote the book of the Odyssey before the book of the Iliad, as is commonly said. To this he replied that the Iliad was the first written. As to the common tale that he was blind, I had no need to ask him any question, for I could perceive for myself that his eyes were just as good as my own. I often talked with him and asked him questions about many things, whenever he chanced to be at leisure, and these he would always answer as pleasantly as can be imagined. He was all the more friendly with me after a certain cause had been tried, in which he won the day.
So he imagines going to kind of a Greek heaven.
That's right.
And meeting up with Homer. And so I wonder if part of the parody here is this. When I read this, it made me think of Socrates in the Apology, where he's musing about what life after death might be like, and he wonders, well, if it's meeting up with all these people from the past, I can go keep doing what I'm doing.
That's right.
What could be better?
No greater joy than to go down and to interview the famous dead, to ask Achilles and Hector all my fascinating questions.
Right.
Brilliant. That's exactly right.
And I was reading some commentary on this. I thought this was an interesting take, is that one of the ways that Lucian might be kind of jerking his audiences around is that he leads the audience on of all these interesting questions that he asks Homer, but the ones that he actually reports are the least interesting of them all.
You think so?
Well, I don't know.
Whether he was blind, which was first, the Iliad or the Odyssey?
Where did he actually come from?
Right.
I mean, he's playing with these traditions of who Homer was, right? But any of kind of the very, the deep questions that you might ask Homer, he keeps off the page as a way of kind of poking his audience,
right,
and reminding them that he's not all that serious.
So I learned something here in the course of reading this.
Please.
I have long taught my students about the supposed origin of Homer's name as Hahomeros, the hostage.
Yes.
Or Ha-me-haron, the one who doesn't see.
Oh, yeah, right.
And I didn't realize, this is the extent of my ignorance, the beginning of the extent of my ignorance, that those two come from Lucian.
Ah, yes.
It's in terms of Homeric scholarship, it's really not a very old designation or citation. Because Homer was, 750, 785 is the traditional date. This is 900 years later.
Yeah.
Lucian is speculating on the origin of Homer's name.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Fascinating nonetheless.
Right.
Great storyteller.
So, and that's just one episode in dozens in this work that takes you, from the Isles of the Blessed to also the Moon and Venus.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would love someday to tackle that work.
We should definitely do so.
Entirety. Yeah. All right. So, in regard to these questions, of what Lucian is up to, I think we'll kind of see how this goes. I think one of the interesting things about this text we're going to jump into, Alexander the False Prophet, is that unlike a true story, he does seem to be drawing on actual events, perhaps in actual persona that maybe he didn't encounter himself, but that was known as a kind of a religious charlatan in his day. And it's a lot shorter than a true history, but we can check this out and kind of maybe see and try to come to some conclusion of what Lucian is trying to do with this work. This definition of him is as an equal opportunity offender.
Yes,
I like that a lot. He does not pull any punches, and he points his gun in all directions. And so it's, as kind of a modern corollary, it makes me think of something like South Park, right?
What's that?
South Park is this animated show.
Oh, you never seen it?
Never seen it. Of course not. Right. But you've heard of South Park, haven't you?
I have.
Okay.
They have the little weeble wobble characters.
Yes, exactly right. And they're famous for pulling no punches and attacking and mocking everyone.
People on the left as well as on the right.
Exactly, right. And
pillorying, you would say?
Yes, a much better word than attacking. Yes. And satirizing, and often, not always, but they often there's kind of an undercurrent of a fairly serious cultural, if not moral, argument that comes out of these ridiculous, often profane cartoons. And Lucian reminds me very much of that kind of tone.
Huh.
Yeah.
Aristophanic also?
Yes, exactly. And also in that same kind of tradition is, we talk about, the novelty of Lucian having somebody, going to Venus, but we also have, Aristophanes having somebody riding up into heaven on the back of a giant dung beetle.
That's correct.
Right? So, Lucian in some ways is not even outdoing Aristophanes.
No,
right?
to cloud cuckoo land.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So what was the treatise on Alexander the False Prophet?
Yes, well, let me quote from that great bastion of truth, Wikipedia. And on Wikipedia, you can find this statement. Lucian's treatise, Alexander the False Prophet, describes the rise of Alexander of Abantakis, which is, again, modern-day Turkey, but up on the north, the coast, along the Black Sea. A charlatan who claimed to be the prophet of the serpent god Glycon. Though the account is satirical in tone, it seems to be a largely accurate report of the Glycon cult, and many of Lucian's statements about the cult have been confirmed through archaeological evidence, including coins, statues, and inscriptions. Lucian describes his own meeting with Alexander, in which he posed as a friendly philosopher, but when Alexander invited him to kiss his hand, Lucian bit it instead.
Now, why would he do that?
I don't. Again,
sorry to interrupt, but
No.
when someone bites the hand that doesn't feed them, I have to ask a question.
Right. Well, you get from this work that Lucian is disgusted by Alexander and people like Alexander. But Wikipedia reports as kind of two things are true: that Lucian actually met Alexander. I don't think that's necessarily provable, and the idea that he would bite his hand also kind of strikes me as kind of over the top satirical.
A little bit,
right?
Yeah.
I suppose it could have happened. Lucian bit it instead. Lucian reports that aside from himself, the only others who dared challenge Alexander's reputation as a true prophet were the Epicureans, whom he lauds as heroes, and the Christians.
So let's just summarize. This fellow Alexander, he lives in a remote part of modern-day Turkey along the Black Sea.
Yes.
He's a Greek.
Yes.
And he is the priest of a snake god named Glycon.
Yes.
Which means sweetheart or something like that.
Exactly.
Glucon means sweet, does it not?
Right.
And Lucian goes and visits him.
Yes.
And takes a chunk out of his paw.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Because he's a fake. He's a faker. He's bilking people out of their money.
So you bite the hand, and that's a way of exposing his fraudulence?
I guess so. Yeah. or as a way of kind of Lucian letting us know how he really feels about this guy. I think that the text makes it fairly clear how he feels about this guy.
And he says at the end as well, if I may, that this guy Alexander was a famous prophet, widely respected, but there were two groups that didn't buy into his calliope.
Yes.
Right, and that is Epicureans and Christians.
Right?
Okay.
And I think one of the really interesting things about Lucian is the kind of the moment that he finds himself in. Again, Apuleius wrestles with a lot of these same kind of things. If I had to pick, what is the Metamorphoses or the Golden Ass really about?
Right.
It is trying to find some kind of mystical, transcendent truth that you can rely upon. Right? And so for Lucius, the main character of that book, it ends up being the goddess Isis provides that platform. But even there too, the debate about how that book ends has always been: did he find truth, or is he just being duped? Are the Isiac priests kind of just bilking him out of his money?
Those are the priests of Isis.
Yes, right. And so a lot of these same kinds of questions and world that Lucian lives in, we see this this wild variety of mystery cults and prophets and people coming to town and inviting this is the new thing that you need to latch onto, and it does seem to be kind of an element of the second century.
Okay.
Where you do have it's politically speaking, we're in that era of the so-called 5 good emperors.
Yes.
Right, and so there is a fair amount of stability and peace that comes under Trajan and Hadrian.
Then Antoninus Pius.
Right.
Then Marcus Aurelius.
And you also have kind of this rediscovery and reappreciation of kind of the best of Greek culture, which is an aspect of the so-called second sophistic, which is happening right now. And so I wonder if that these times of kind of peace and prosperity on the borders allow for a lot more cross-cultural engagement. And so there's a lot more kind of sharing of ideas, and that kind of world allows for guys like Alexander to come on the scene and ply their wares in a way that maybe under Nero could not have been possible.
Interesting. So was there an actual cult of this snake god Glycon? Were there people actually worshiping this creature?
Yeah. So the archaeological evidence suggests so. I mean, we find Glycon on coin portraits. There are archaeological remains, statues of the snake. So again, unlike the true story, the true history, Lucian here is grappling with something that does seem to have been an actual thing.
Yep. Interesting.
But I did want to get your opinion on something.
Okay.
So like in terms of like the spread of Christianity,
right?
What in the second century, like during Lucian's time and where he was, could you talk maybe a little about like what's going on? Because we were pre-Constantine.
Sure. So 200 years before Constantine.
Culturally, Christianity still has to kind of keep its head down.
Right.
But what's going in terms of like who's writing, what kind of ideas?
Right.
I know this is also the era where a lot of the Gnostic stuff is going on.
That's right.
Right. Which I think fits with that kind of that religious wildness that's happening.
Right.
But could you speak to kind of the Christian history at this time?
I think I can, but I'm going to try to make modest claims.
Okay.
Because this is a difficult era to nail down.
Right.
There's not nearly as much evidence as we would like. But the beginning of the 2nd century AD, the church in Antioch has a long tradition already. It's very well established. It's relatively close to Lucian's birthplace of Samosata. And the church is strong in the east. So you have the centers like Antioch and Jerusalem. You have a growing church in Athens and places like that. All the apostles are long dead. Some of their successors, like Polycarp, is in Smyrna about this time. His martyrdom is early 2nd century AD. If Justin Martyr pretty soon is going to be addressing his apology to the Roman emperors, asking for leniency. He also has a dialogue with a famous dialogue with a Jew named Celsus. And so in my view, as I've studied this, the Gospels are all written by this point, and there are, as you said, a number of counterfeits, and you didn't use the word counterfeits, but competitors, apocryphal Gospels,
right.
Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Peter, things like that, all in the air and circulating. And in terms of the thinking, primarily, you have several different camps, which if you glanced at them in a surface kind of fashion, you might think there's a lot in common. People often confuse Gnostics and Platonists.
Yeah.
And they confuse Platonists with the later Manichees, right? But each of these schools has a distinct set of beliefs which do not overlap with the others. That's what it means to be distinct. Mm-hmm. Two other very famous works are either in the process of being written or just recently concluded: The Shepherd of Hermas and a work called the Didache, which are early instruction on the Christian life and discussion of doctrine. You have the post-apostolic fathers, people like Clement of Rome, some of whose works survive. But Christianity is not very mature either in its institutions or in the something very closely connected to that, dissemination of doctrine.
Right.
So I think that the Gospels are circulating, and the letters of Paul and the Apocalypse, and they're being read in different places, and there's a teaching structure in place, but the institutions are not mature in any sense.
But there is at least the beginnings of an intellectual.
Oh,
Christian
definitely,
tradition, right?
yes.
Did you mention Tertullian? Because he's
much later.
He's much later. Okay.
So Tertullian, the earliest Tertullian would be, I think, is 180.
Okay.
And maybe lived to 250.
Okay. So he's
right,
at least a generation.
Yes, but on the horizon is a man named Irenaeus of Lyon, who was born in the region of Galatia. He's a Greek, right? And then eventually he died in Lyon, France, and he was the bishop of Lyon. And he's writing Adversus Gentes, against the Gentiles. He comments a lot on the content of the Gospels, and he's very important, and he's not far off, but he's maybe 160, 170.
Okay, yeah. So I mean that's great. Thank you for that. I mean I think that's a really fascinating background to kind of read Lucian against. So even within the dissemination of the Gospels and the spread of Christianity, even within Christianity, there are competing ideas. Right? There's competing Gospels, right? And so someone like Alexander coming along with, as a prophet of this new snake cult,
right?
It's in keeping with a religious landscape where kind of all of these ideas are competing and bouncing around against each other.
Right. I would like to issue a cor regendum.
Yes.
Right now, rather than save it for the next episode.
All right.
Irenaeus did not write Adversus Gentes against the nations. He wrote Adversus Haereses, against heresies. Or heretics.
Right. Good. All right, so I found this quote. This is actually from a book review by one Anna Peterson, who wrote a Bryn Mawr classical review piece.
Oh, yes.
On Inger Kuhn's Lucian's Laughing Gods, Religion, Philosophy, and Popular Culture in the Roman East. And I thought this quote kind of addresses this issue of what Lucius's place is in this intellectual and religious atmosphere, and also how he was received by later traditions. Would you read this quote?
Oh, I'd love to. So this is 2023.
Yes, very recent.
It's basically a minute ago in terms of classical scholarship,
Indeed.
Isn't it?
Yes.
University of Michigan Press. So let's see. Anna Peterson, commenting on Inger Kuhn, says, "As someone who frequently mocks the gods, philosophers, and religious practitioners, Lucian offers valuable, albeit not uncomplicated, evidence for the intersection of ancient religion and popular culture in the Roman East during the 2nd century CE, that is, Common Era, what we would often call AD. Mm-hmm. Yet it may come somewhat as a surprise that this aspect of his writing has not garnered much recent attention in the last few decades, especially given the long tradition of thinking about him as a writer who humorously tackled religious topics. As early as the 4th century CE, Lactantius describes Lucian as someone who, quote, spared neither the gods nor men, Divine Institutes 198. And by the 16th century, Lucian's name had become a slur used by the followers of Martin Luther and John Calvin to label as blasphemers and atheists the likes of Thomas More and Erasmus, themselves translators of Lucian.
Yeah, so I mean that kind of takes us into kind of the heart of kind of the era that you're very interested
Correct.
in, have done a lot of work in.
Yes,
and so I just thought that was interesting that Lucian becomes
a byword, kind of,
a
right?
byword, right? As a blasphemer,
right? You're such a Lucian. You can't take anything seriously when it comes to the gods,
right? Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, of course, Erasmus was a translator of Lucian, a very famous translator of Lucian, and the first to translate him into Latin in any extended way. And his work on Lucian was extremely popular and was used to teach a lot of people how to read Greek in the first place.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So there's a book by Erica Rummel I read a few years ago. We did an episode on Professor Rummel. The book is Erasmus as a Translator of the Classics, and she details how it is that Erasmus was translating Lucian into very good Latin.
Yeah.
But we're more interested here, I guess, in what's Lucian's attitude? Is he completely a mocker?
Right.
Or does he have any serious respect for religion?
Right. And my sense from Peterson's piece here is that she's suggesting that like the followers of Luther and Calvin would respond to Erasmus saying, like, why are you even bothering translating this guy? Is that like, it's not even worthy of...
No, I don't think.
No?
I mean, I didn't look at this particular issue before this episode.
Right.
But my general sense of it, and others should test this if they want more specificity, is not that Luther and Calvin and their followers did not think Erasmus should translate it. They didn't like Erasmus's similar attitude of indifference toward religion.
Oh, I see.
So
yes.
Lucian is taken as someone who is either a mocker of religion or kind of indifferent. Sort of, well, they're all the same.
Yes.
Whether you're a Christian or an Epicurean or, you're worshiping the snake god Glycon, it's all just the same kind of thing.
Right.
And they didn't like what they perceived as Thomas More and Erasmus's similar attitude.
I see.
But as a literary question, should Lucian be translated and read? Absolutely.
Right. Well, speaking of whether Lucian should be read or translated,
yes?
It's time for the ads.
All right. This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by Quackit Publishing.
Wait, Quackit?
Yeah, Quackit.
Is this a new sponsor? What are you talking about?
Oh, wait a
Quackit?
minute. I'm thinking of that group that approached us and wanted to be our sponsor.
Oh, those guys.
Make Way for Ducklings?
Yeah.
You don't remember Quackit Publishing?
I remember. It was like all their books had to do with
waterfowl,
mallards, and
right.
The
Mother Goose series.
Right, exactly.
That's what I remember, and not Duckworths of London.
No,
publisher of fine classical texts, but Quackit.
Quackit.
What did we tell those guys?
We told them to take a hike. I mean,
yeah, we didn't say just put it on our bill.
They offered in lieu of payment. There was like like bags of Wonder Bread. They said just to go out by the pond and where we could kind of cast it to various waterfowl.
I see.
So I'm not interested.
We were not interested. So we passed on them. So whom did we choose, actually?
I believe our sponsor is Hackett Publishing. Yes. So listeners, Hackett Publishing, go to hackettpublishing.com, HACKETT publishing.com, and see the world of literature that is waiting for you. These guys have been with us since the beginning. They've been around 53 years, offices in Indianapolis and Cambridge, Massachusetts, and they are, as we like to say, one of these wonderful companies that is keeping the flame alive.
Instead of curse the darkness, what should one do?
It's better to light a single candle.
That's right, a literary candle. So go to hackettpublishing.com, HACKETT, check out their broad catalog of works from the classical world and many other places,
yes.
East Asian studies, modern philosophy, South American studies, and build your library of good things to read so that you can also become a man dear to the muses or a woman dear to the muses. We might say a friend of the muses.
There we go. Right. So I like to I like to use Hackett's books in my classes because they are very affordable. My students always appreciate the low prices. But that's not even really the main thing.
No.
The high quality.
It's the accuracy and the beauty
of the translations. Can't say enough about it. So do yourself a favor. Go to hackettpublishing.com. Find the works that you want. Click on them. Put them in your grocery basket. And Dave, what's the coupon code and what do they get?
The coupon code is AN2024.
Yes.
And that will get them, what is it? 20% off.
20% off.
And double the shipping.
No. Free shipping.
Free shipping.
Yes.
20% off and free shipping. Check it out.
Check it out. This episode of Ad Nauseam is also brought to you by the good people of Ratio Coffee. They too have been with us for quite some time.
Yeah,
right?
I think it's going on 4 years.
Right. So it's our good friend, entrepreneur.
That's right.
Mark Helwig. He's done it.
I really like that, entrepreneur, but I have to say it sounds a little bit too much like manure, and I'm concerned.
Oh, now I can't unhear that, right?
Yeah. Entrepreneur.
Brewneur.
Okay.
Right. And so both you and I have used these wonderful machines for many years now.
Works of art. Makes my toaster look like Picasso.
Yes, yes. Everything else in my kitchen is just simply embarrassed.
Right. You like how I put down Picasso there?
Not a fan?
Not a fan.
Not a fan. I gotcha. Right. So yeah, we both currently have one of these Ratio 8s, which is their kind of their flagship.
That's right.
The flagship machines brews the perfect cup of coffee every single morning.
You used to have the 6?
I used to have the 6, also a great, a wonderful machine.
Same technology with the Fibonacci head, the metallic veins.
Right.
No scorch pad or anything like that, but its own hulking flag on.
Yes, exactly. And anytime you go out to a restaurant and get a cup of coffee, you're going to be measuring it against.
It's a disappointing experience.
It's a disappointing experience, right? The bar has been raised.
That's
now,
correct.
Dave, what about this Ratio 4 that's coming out?
The Ratio 4 is coming down the pipeline. It's going to be a sleek, agile machine. I've seen the prototypes, not in person, but, images thereof. And Mark said, we need to come up with some kind of way to bring this same delicious coffee technology on a smaller scale.
Yeah.
I've been traveling recently, stayed in a hotel, on one recent trip, and they have one of those little kind of Guric sort of machines where you put the pod or the little satchel and it's terrible.
It's terrible.
The Ratio 4 is going to solve that problem. You can get high quality, barista quality pour over coffee in a small form factor. And I don't want to say inexpensive, but highly attainable.
Highly attainable. So for our listeners who maybe have looked at the 6 and 8 saying,
Right.
hey, I'd love to have one, I can't quite go there.
Right.
The 4 could be the answer
That's
to that.
right.
Yeah.
And coming out this fall. But if you can go there,
Yes.
a purchase that you will not regret, I don't think there's any way that'll happen. Go to ratiocoffee.com, RATIOCOFFEE. Check out their many fine products. And then, Jeff, there's a coupon code, isn't there, for 15% off?
Yes. For the month of May, it's ANCOF1.
And the F stands for flavorful.
Flavorful. I'll buy that.
Check it out.
Check it out. All right, Dave, as we get back into it, let's dive a bit into this text itself, this
I'd love
Alexander
to.
the False Prophet. And would you read us some Greek?
I would love that also. You know me well, don't you,
I
Dr.
do.
Winkle?
Yes.
Okay, so here are a few lines of the text. This is from the Loeb edition of one A.M. Harmon, and it goes like this. Sumen issos, o fictatib kelse, mikranti kai faulon oye ta prostagma. Prostatein ton Alexandru soi tu abonote hitu. Goetas beon kai epinoias autukai tol memata. Kai maganeas eis biblion egrapsanta pempsai. Tode etis atheloi prosta acribes hekaston epexienai. U meonestin etas Alexandru tu Philippu praxes anagrapsai. Tosutas eis kakian hutas. Hosas eis ardretenekenos. Hamos de e meta sum gnomes, ana gnosis thy melois kai ta ende onta tois, histardrumenois pros logiestai. Hupos de so mai soi ton athlon kai tain, augeu bustasian, e kai me pasan, ales duna mingaten he autu ana cathardrastai perdraso mai oligus hosus ton cofinon, ek fordresas. I'm looking for a period here, Jeff.
It goes on and on, yeah.
But we're not done.
We're almost there.
Hosapakenon tekma drayo, posse pasakahos, amuthetos ein he kapros, hein triskilioi boas en palois, etesen poiesai edunanta.
Wonderful. Well done. Excellent.
Thank you. It was a pure joy.
Right. Now, the word that jumped out at me as I was looking at this is that when he's addressing this to a friend,
Right.
Celsus or Celsus, but he says, "Oh, fictabd."
Yes.
I have never seen that word before.
I think it's a typo, and I stumbled over it. I'm pretty sure this is some, real-time textual emendation.
Yeah.
I think it's filtate.
That's what I thought.
I think
right?
it's the superlative of philos. It's
Okay.
it's filtate in the masculine singular vocative. Oh, my dearest.
Yes.
And it helped because I had the translation, right?
Right.
My dear. So I think that's probably what it is. Whoever transcribed it got some of the letters off.
Okay, that was my sense because that one jumped out as just kind of a
Crazy
bum,
word.
a bum note.
Yeah, I thought, well, maybe that's some kind of a Hittite word or something that
Right.
crept in, but no.
No. Okay. Well, here's the translation of those lines, also by A.M. Harmon, but modernized by one Philip Harland. No doubt, my dear Celsus, you think it a slight and trivial matter to bid me set down in a book and send you the history of Alexander, the impostor of Abanotechus, including all his clever schemes, bold emprises, and sleights of hand. But in point of fact, if one should aim to examine each detail closely, it would be no less task than to record the exploits of Philip's son Alexander. The one was as great in villainy as the other in heroism. Nevertheless, if it should be your intention to overlook faults as you read, and to fill out for yourself the gaps in my tale, I will undertake the task for you, and will essay to clean up that Augean stable, if not wholly, yet to the extent of my ability, fetching out some few baskets full, so that from them you may judge how great, how inexpressible was the entire quantity of filth that 3,000 head of cattle were able to create in many years.
So explain for us, Jeff.
Yeah.
Explain for us, please, some of the literary qualities of this quote as well as the humor and what are we supposed to make of it?
Right. Well, I mean, there's the wonderful juxtaposition of that. You know, he is going to say, he uses an allusion to the Heracles' labor of cleaning out the Augean stables. Right. Which I guess in some ways kind of raises the tone. But he says, what I'm going to offer to you is I'm going to try to go into those barns and bring out as many baskets of manure as possible to kind of show you how dirty and filthy this guy was.
Okay.
So
the dirty and filthy guy is Alexander of Abanatekos.
Yes, he's our false prophet.
False prophet of the snake god Glycon.
Right.
We've got a number of moving pieces here.
We do.
It's all very unfamiliar.
Yes. And he compares that Alexander to a more famous Alexander.
Right.
Right. And he says, well,
the son of Philip.
So Alexander III, the Great.
Right.
And he says, and that guy was as heroic as this guy I'm going to talk about is villainous.
Okay.
Right. So he's comparing Alexander's, he's using kind of mythological references, but he's also, this is very second century. This is you use the elements of these lofty texts, but you kind of entertain the audience by attending to kind of their lower quality. So of all the 12 labors of Heracles, he chooses the one that involves him shoveling out manure.
Right.
He says, I'm going to be shoveling it too.
So Alexander the Great is going on 500 years, 460 some years before Lucian. And of course, Hercules is legendary, much earlier, if at all.
Right.
So, is there some kind of an analog we can make to our own setting? Comparison of two famous people of the same name. I was trying to think of George Washington.
Yes.
And then some contemporary George Costanza.
Yeah, that's great.
Some like a contemporary who's clearly ridiculous.
Yes. Right.
So the satirist would say to George Costanza, "I'm going to compare you and your utter inanity right. to that other famous George."
Right. Yeah, exactly. Or William Shakespeare and Billy Carter.
There you go. That's the president's brother?
Yes.
Okay.
Right, exactly. Right, yeah. So not maybe a best known example, but
No, it's good.
Right. Yeah.
And so that connects them somehow.
Right.
And then you got the Augean stables, taking out baskets full of that stuff, the entire quantity of filth that 3,000 head of cattle created in many years.
Right. So, so what is Lucian up to here? I mean, so he's addressing a friend.
Right.
We have no idea if this is a real person or if he's doing a parody of a genre.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of appears as I'm writing this as a letter to you, and I'm going to tell you of what happened to me. But for all the humor, I never in any of the stuff that I read in Alexander do I get the sense that Lucian he's doing a head fake.
Right.
And that he actually approves of what this guy is doing. Right. The satire, it's pretty, it's aggressive, and it's the attacks are brutal. And if anything, he's also satirizing the dupes who bought into it.
Yes,
it's almost like I can't believe how stupid people are.
Well, that's really, I would say, the way to effectively criticize a charlatan. There's no hope of having any impact on the charlatan himself. Because the charlatan is highly calculating. That's what a charlatan is, right? The charlatan has already, I would say, unless they're a true believer, right, in their own nonsense, but they have already calculated the situation and the cost and so forth, and they're going to lie expansively and consistently to get what they want. Yeah. If you want to have any impact, you have to deal with the customers, so to speak. Right. Don't you think?
Yes. No. Absolutely.
In all of your years of charlatanism, isn't this the kind of approach you've taken?
Yeah. Certainly. I'm wondering if as I was reading Lucian, I was always wondering, is he going to come around to a kind of a spot where even as he's criticizing him, he also kind of admires him in a way, like there's that subgenre in film of like the heist.
Yes.
Like so. Like technically, what these people are doing is illegal, and they should be punished for it. But we kind of we celebrate that they're able to get away with it.
Ocean's 47, Ocean's 48, and Ocean's 49.
Right. I mean, it's Odysseus the Clever Thief.
That's correct.
Right. And so,
or that terrible movie Matchstick Men. Did you see that?
I didn't see that.
Nicolas Cage. Oh. I only say it's terrible because I'm really bad at watching those kinds of movies.
What? How so? What do you mean?
I'm so tremendously incredulous. Like if the filmmaker is telegraphing the solution to the supposed mystery in the heist.
Yeah.
I miss it every time. So then we get to the end, and what was obvious to everybody else is a complete revelation to me.
Yeah.
What? He's with them? He was the thief all along?
Right.
I didn't see it coming.
Gotcha. Right.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, I'm not all the way through it.
Okay.
But my sense, Lucius, he doesn't come around to at least some kind of grudging admiration for Alexander in what he's able to how he's able to dupe people.
Right. Now, not to be overly pedantic, which is my forte, but I notice you going back and forth in your description of him as sometimes Lucian.
Yes.
And sometimes Lucius. Are there two names for the person? Is it Lucianus or Lucianos?
I think the mistake I'm making is that the main character in Apuleius is Lucius.
Ah,
right.
So it's not Lucian.
Right. So
that helps a lot.
Okay, so apologies if I've kind of blurred those.
No, it's my own mistake. So Lucian, the author, is speaking through the character Lucius, kind of, or has the character Lucius, whether he's speaking through him or not.
Apuleius is, not Lucian.
Now I'm lost.
Okay, so in The Golden Ass, the main character is Lucius, right? And Lucian I don't think he mentions his own name, but he presents it that he himself, Lucian, is the one doing these things.
Is it first person omniscient or third person omniscient, or what's the perspective of the storytelling in Lucian of Samosata?
It's a first person point of view.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. That helps a great deal.
Okay. Right. Yeah. It is. And we were just talking about two Alexanders. Now we got Lucius.
Right.
Lucian. Right. Exactly.
So now, as we go into Alexander the False Prophet Part 2, you might say, this is divided up into a number of different sections.
It is. Yeah. I think there's 56 in total. We'll see how far we get today. And so in the next chapter or section, you might want to call it, Lucian is still trying to kind of justify why he's doing this, and he admits that he's embarrassed. He kind of passes it off on Celsus. He's like, well, you asked for this, right? So if I'm just going to give you baskets full of manure, you better not complain about it. And he says, I'm kind of embarrassed for myself for agreeing to do this. And so he's touchily kind of approaching the subject, like, should I even write about this guy?
Right. The guy's so much beneath contempt.
Yes.
So if he was a real character, which we'll just assume for the sake of argument that this Alexander was, Lucian has immortalized him now.
Yes, exactly.
Because here we are talking about him at the beginning of the 21st century in a continent and in a language that Lucian never imagined.
Exactly. It reminds he seems to be kind of dealing with criticisms that I often encounter in like true crime stuff.
Okay.
And I love true crime stuff.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
But a lot of people would say is that stop talking about these guys, right? I mean, they're consequential in terms of history and what they've done, but by continuing, they're monsters. By continuing to kind of talk about them, you kind of turn them into anti-heroes in some sense.
Well, I guess my sense of it, since you asked, is that it all depends on why you're doing it.
Yeah,
it seems to me inhuman to stop people from talking about such things. Right?
Yes,
it's not because it makes such a huge impact on the psyche when you hear about the terrible things, the murderous things that others have done.
Yes.
I find that it's impossible to just pretend it didn't happen.
Right, of course.
That seems just inhuman. So the question is, why talk about it? What's the purpose?
Yes, exactly.
And if it is possible, I would say, to take a wicked fascination in it. Like that great scene in the Gorgias of Plato. See how I snuck Plato back in?
Nice.
Where he's talking about one of the characters running down to the long walls and gazing on the corpses of those who have died there during the Peloponnesian War.
Right.
So there is such a thing as morbid fascination. And you don't want that, I would say, in true crime. But there may be other reasons why a person would consume such media.
Yeah.
I don't think it's you're not taking a kind of morbid pleasure in it, right?
No, I don't.
Definitely
I don't think
not.
so. But I mean, I think I have to I have to check myself and often kind of ask myself, why am I drawn to these things? I think it's a question that I think a lot of people don't ask. It can very easily become a kind of a morbid fascination. And so I think the legitimate criticism of that stuff comes in when it becomes sensationalized.
Yes.
And you turn these people into kind of misunderstood heroes.
Yeah, that's awful.
That's awful, right? And so I think that's what Lucian is wrestling with. If we can take him at face value,
Right.
he says, like, am I making a mistake by even
Right.
talking about him?
Well, Lucian says in section 2 that Alexander does not deserve a biography, but to be dismembered by foxes and apes in the arena.
I like that detail, right?
Yeah, I do too. So those are some extremes. Do I write a biography or do I set him loose in the arena to be dismembered by foxes and apes?
Well, it just struck me as kind of an odd pairing
Yes.
in the arena. Release the foxes
Yes.
and the apes.
Yeah, and speaking of apes,
Yes.
are you going to go see that movie?
Oh, is there a new Planet of the Apes coming
Kingdom
out?
of the genus of the phylum of the planet of the apes. I just wanted to say that line.
Right. There is a new one coming out.
Yeah, there
though.
is. It's out.
It's out?
It is out.
Okay.
But back to Lucian.
Yes, right. So he talks about, it was a way of kind of justifying it. He tags Arrian, the historian, and he says, well, Arrian, he talked about one
Teloribus.
Yes, who was a famous bandit. That was a name new to me.
Like the outlaw Jesse James.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Now he's famous.
Jesse James, Al Capone, John Dillinger.
Yes.
There's so many traditions.
Bonnie and Clyde.
Exactly, right.
I think partly it's envy. People envy those who
Break the rules?
Yes, for a while, for a brief time, they break the rules.
Yeah.
And that's clearly immoral.
Yes.
I mean, the envying of it.
Right. Yeah.
But also very human.
It's very human. So in my film class a couple semesters ago, I screened Bonnie and Clyde with Warren Beatty, the famous 60s film.
Okay.
And it was a clear attempt to lionize.
Valorize him, yeah.
These
he was Clyde?
dolts.
Yeah.
He was Clyde,
Yeah.
right? And Faye Dunaway was Bonnie. And so they added there was a dashing glamour to it.
Right.
And
They
so-
didn't choose unattractive people.
Of course not.
To play the main roles.
Right. And the real life Bonnie and Clyde they were not lookers.
I just leave that right there, Jeff.
And incredibly murderous.
Yes.
Right. And without
It's nothing charming about
and
it.
killing without conscience. And so
Right.
I think that film, and we talked about it in classes about, they've mythologized them in this way that kind of makes them heroes.
So Lucian recognizes this as a problem.
Yes.
And decides whether or not he shall do it in the character Alexander.
Right. And he comes to the conclusion is that, well, Arrian did it, so there's a template for it.
I see.
And he says that Alexander himself is way worse than this Teloribus
Right.
guy, and so maybe because his villainy is so widespread, he needs to be taken down a peg.
Okay. So what was Alexander like, this false priest?
Right. So let me read a little bit from section 3 again. This
Okay.
is the Harman translation with the modernization by Philip Harland. And so he says, first I will draw you a word picture of the man himself. And so another thing that is often a feature of second century literature is the ekphrasis.
Yes.
So it's almost as if he's describing, ekphrasis, speaking out. You take something static and you almost give it animation through
Correct.
words, right? And so here it's almost like he's describing a statue of this Alexander. So I will draw you a word picture of the man himself, making as close a likeness as I can, although I'm not particularly good at drawing. As regards his person, in order that I may exhibit this also to you, he was tall and handsome in appearance and really godlike. His skin was fair, his beard not yet very thick. His long hair was in part natural, in part...
So he must have used oat milk every day.
Exactly right.
Garnier fructus.
Exactly right. And his hair and some kind of, lotion as well. So his long hair was in part natural, in part false. So he had like extensions, a wig.
Maybe.
Right? But very similar, so that most people did not detect that it was not his own. His eyes shone with a great glow of fervor and enthusiasm. His voice was at once very sweet and very clear. And in a word, no fault could be found with him in any respect as far as all that went. So he was a good-looking guy.
Yeah, so this is why magicians and illusionists always put on the stage the scantily dressed beautiful woman, right?
Sure, right.
In order to distract the viewer
Yes.
from the sleight of hand.
Exactly.
So how one exception occurs to me, and that is Savonarola. You know, the
Yes.
Italian monk and Florentine reformer who was eventually burned at the stake.
Right.
Apparently, if the portraits are right, not a comely man.
Not a comely man, but a fiery speaker.
Yes.
Right.
In other words, a person who could attract a big crowd and lead them. But it seems to me those persons are the exception.
Yes. Exactly right.
And more often, charlatans have something physically appealing about them.
Right. Exactly. I mean, to put up a very large umbrella. I think it's a similar way reason why celebrities are asked for their political opinions.
Oh, yes.
Right, exactly. So you're good looking.
Right.
So what do you think about the capital gains tax? Right. So, but I mean, that's true. If, attractive people, there's a deference to beauty.
Right.
It's very human.
I'm sure you get that all the time.
All the time. I can't. I gotta brush them away. Yeah.
You can't go to the grocery store without someone asking you your opinion on the capital gains tax.
It gets so old. Let me tell you. Right. So
Section 4, Jeff.
Section 4. Right. So he. I mean, Lucian says, by his own experience, very talented. He had all of these natural gifts. But his downfall is that he used them for all the wrong reasons.
That's really interesting. Are there other examples of charlatans?
Yeah, I mean, he lists a number of others.
Okay.
That most of them we don't know anything about today. But I think again he's doing kind of a comic trick by he says, well, I'm going to talk about these people by not talking about them, or he's saying that he's similar to all these other. Charlatans. I guess what I mean to say is that again he's advertising, he's giving airtime to other charlatans after just saying that should I even be talking about this in the first place?
Right. So Eurybatus,
yes,
Cecropes, Fernandus, Aristodemus, and so forth.
Yeah.
Okay.
These are all apparently kind of famous charlatans of the day.
Frauds.
Right.
So Jeff, I think we have to pay attention to the time a little bit here.
Yep. We'll pick this up next time. Gonna get deeper into the false prophet here?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Finish this up in episode 152. But Jeff, before we get out of here, do you want to say a few things about the Moss method?
Boy, I think I could give the advertisement.
Well, go for it.
But I am going to leave it to the man who
created
the Moss method to tell us a little bit about how one might go about learning Greek.
All right. Well, Charles Melville Moss, a fantastic 19th century Greek professor, wrote a book called A First Greek Reader. And he says, to learn Greek, you should use your mind more than your thumbs.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
In other words, don't be constantly going to the lexicon to try exactly.
Yeah.
Because use your imagination and your memory, and that is fantastic advice.
Yes.
So I've developed this program, 4 modules, 40 lessons in each module, except for the last one, which has 43, and features some Lucian.
Excellent.
And it takes you from neophyte to erudite.
Yeah.
The course is designed to immerse you in reading from the first day. So it's not learn a rule, apply a rule, forget a rule, go on to the next one. It's actually reading Greek.
Fantastic.
And it's a good value. I'm absolutely convinced you cannot find a better Greek program at this price point anywhere on the interwebs. Go to mossmethod.com, check out my free stuff, and then try my course.
And you also have the opportunity to meet other students from around the world.
That's
right?
correct.
And
on Friday mornings, folks from California, from Switzerland, and many other places.
And they have interaction with each other and direct access to you as well.
Yes, any question you want. So I don't just dump the module on you and say, okay, learn on your own. You get to interact with me anytime you would like.
Fantastic. And what if they want to learn some Latin?
Well, then they should do so.
Yes, I agree.
They should go to latinperdiem.com. Check out my program. Takes you from no knowledge of Latin to much knowledge of Latin. I use Lingua Latina per se Illustrata, Hans Orberg's fabulous textbook. Latin teaches itself. We've got Unit 1, chapters 1 through 9, and we've got Unit 2, which just launched and is still available in a very discounted beta version. And if you want to see how I teach and what I know, you can go to the YouTube channel, latinperdiem.com, the YouTube channel. Check out more than 2,000 free instructional videos. We also have these great quizzes that you can get. Watch the video, take the quiz, get immediate praise or blame, depending on your performance.
Excellent. Sounds good. Hey, so Dave, before we get out of here, we got people to thank.
We do. We want to thank Mishka Fernando, our fabulous engineer who does all of this for us, makes us sound good, puts everything in its proper place. We got some musicians to thank as well.
Yep, Scott Van Zen and Ken Tamplin. I mean, these guys can play.
They can, and sing. Do you think they would like our opening little riffs on pop pop songs and dad jokes.
I bet they would just be. I can feel them just kind of shaking their heads.
They're both dads.
Yeah,
one of them's a grandpa. In fact,
is that right?
That's
okay.
right.
So, okay, maybe.
So they might go for it.
I hope so.
Jeff, what if people want to get in touch with us?
Well, they should write to us. They can write to you at Dave at adnauseam.com. Don't forget the V.
Or Jeff at adnauseam.com. There is a V in the word nauseum, Navseam. That's how the Latin is spelled. If they want to get a t-shirt, Jeff?
Yep, go to adnauseam.com, check out our Lurch with Merch section, and pick yourself up a t-shirt or one of the many other objects on sale there.
Yes, things like stickers and mugs and hats and so forth.
Yep.
Next week, we're coming back here to Lucian. Going to do part 2, wrap that up.
Yep, carry out some more of his baskets of filth. Yes. And Dave, you have our gustatory parting shot, yes?
Yes, this is one that you dug up for me from a guy named Dimitri Martin. Who's Mr. Martin?
No clue. I like the quote, though.
I like it, too. So he says, cotton candy is the perfect snack for when I'm in the mood to eat dry, scratchy fabric.
That's about right.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.